logically, it's the process of improvement which is more important than the actual idea of what you're going to build. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that. So think about the great technology companies, Microsoft, for example. Microsoft in the 1970s, right, with DOS, has nothing to do with Microsoft in 2022, right? It's a completely different company. It has completely different products. So it's not really the idea that made them successful. It must be something else that made them successful. And I posit that what made them successful is the process of improvement of that idea. And that's what makes companies great.
How can a company actually achieve great success? Our guest today has a method that every business leader needs to hear. Meet Borya Shakhnovich. He is the CEO of airSlate, a workflow automation company that he's evolved out of an existing endeavor called PDF Filler. Borya believes that it's not always a brilliant concept that makes a business thrive, but it's the ability of its leaders to improve incrementally upon existing ideas over time. Tune in to hear more about the compelling philosophy that has made airSlate such a success. IT Visionaries is brought to you by Salesforce Platform. Did you know streaming right now on Salesforce Plus, you can watch Legends of Low-Code. In this series, 3 teams of trailblazers race to build the best low-code app for one of California's largest nonprofits called Pacific Clinics. Check it out in the link below.
9 trailblazers have answered the call to build the best app for a nonprofit in only 2 days.
This is a powerhouse crew here.
I hope everybody brings it. This is Legends of Low-Code.
Welcome everyone to another episode of IT Visionaries, and today we have a special guest. He is the CEO of a company called airSlate. Welcome, Borya Shakhnovich.
Thanks, Albert. Nice to be here.
Listen, we're pumped to have you here. You got an interesting company. Your background's amazing, and that's why we want to start the show right away and get to know you a little bit better. We are going to enter right away. We're going to enter the lightning round. The lightning round is brought to us by Salesforce Platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Borya, this is where we ask you questions outside of the world of work so our audience can get to know you a little better. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. We read that you are an immigrant. You immigrated to the United States at 11 years old. Is that accurate?
That's right.
All right. You are also, your father, got his first job at Harvard. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Immigrant dads are notoriously tough on their kids to educate themselves. Your dad's working at Harvard. What was the pressure like to learn as a little kid?
Yeah, my parents did a really good job in making sure that good was never good enough. And I think that made me who I am. Absolutely. You nailed it. Absolutely. Whenever I brought an A, somebody else, the argument was somebody else got an A+. So.
What did you think the first time, because 11 years old is old enough to remember. What was your first reaction coming from the Soviet Union coming to the United States?
Immigration was difficult for me, for sure, because there's a lot of differences in the things that people value in the value systems. The value system in the Soviet Union was very much focused around education, and in America it was very focused on citizenship. And so I thought that, and being a good citizen, and I thought that people in the United States didn't really do anything because when I was 4, I was doing things academically that the U.S. was doing in, maybe 7th or 8th grade when I was in 4th grade. So, it was basically a lot of watching of bad TV when I was in middle school.
I like that. Well, your education followed you through. You went on and to get a PhD in, I don't even know what these subjects are, bioinformatics and computational biophysics. I think I've mixed them. A PhD in bioinformatics and systems biology from BU and a bachelor's in computational biophysics from University of Illinois. It sounded like you got your first job as an academic. What did your parents what was your parents' reaction when you said, "Hey, I'm gonna go entrepreneur. I'm gonna do a startup"?
Yeah, it was much to the chagrin of my mother because they know I was actually a dropout. Well, almost a dropout. It was a long story, but I was kind of a failure in high school and almost failed out of college as well. And And then I got my PhD, which was a big surprise to my parents. And then when I got my faculty appointment, that was an even bigger surprise to my parents. And so they thought that they finally lucked out and I was going to have a normal life. And in the middle of 2008, right before the financial crisis, I left that cushy job in academia to become an entrepreneur for what my mother thought was a really, stupid idea. And they thought that I was going to, live with them in the garage for the rest of their lives, and so they were very depressed about that.
It seemed to work out pretty great. You started a company called PDF Filler, and now you are currently at airSlate. We want to talk a little bit about airSlate specifically. This is now your second company. What is airSlate and what exactly do you guys do?
Well, that's not exactly accurate, actually. What happened was that I started my first company, which was a network for scientists that was aimed at, making the world a better place, and it was called I Am Scientist. And allow people to publish papers and get reviews of those papers faster in order to improve the economy of science. And that didn't work out, but one of my initial investors was running PDF Filler at that time. And so I came to him when my first company failed, and I said, listen, I have this technology that I can share with you. And he's like, I don't know how to use your technology. Why don't you come run PDF Filler with me? And so that was in 2012. And then after that, we ran and bootstrapped PDF Filler to about $16 to $17 million run rate over the next 4 years, from 2012 to 2016. And then when we got our first investment from General Catalyst in the middle of 2017, we bought another company called SignNow, and at that time we renamed our original company, PDF Filler, into airSlate,
Gotcha.
in order to look much more broadly at workflow and document workflow automation. So airSlate is really a company that is now not only focused around just digitization like the initial product PDF Filler was focused on, and not really only focused on the e-signature component of it like SignNow was initially, but it really is a suite of products that allow people to run their businesses and run their whole middle office, both from a digitization perspective as well as the automation perspective, right? So it allows businesses to automate that whole process between the front office and marketing and the back office and finance and accounts receivables and onwards and like that. So it's that automation of the middle office that airSlate does.
For a lot of our audience, they're in technical roles and they work on different software components, or they might be engineering other solutions out there. They might not understand exactly the problem that you're solving. I personally have worked in an office environment for most of my life, and I've felt the pain of document management and so on. But I was hoping you could kind of share a little bit for our audience, like what exactly is the problem? Because, it's easy to say, hey, we are no-code document workflows from e-signatures, payments, from web forms and contracts, some of the lingo there, but give our audience a flavor of like just how painful this process can be at a company without a tool like airSlate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that a lot of the things that happen behind the scenes and really documents and payments are the lifeblood of businesses in a lot of ways. And a lot of SaaS and software has really traditionally been focused on data storage rather than data transport. And what we provide is that middle layer between data storage and the recipient or whoever it is. So like, for example, if you're an employee, you have to fill out a lot of forms, you have to go through a lot of processes, whether it's expense reimbursements or whether it's asking for personal time off or whatever it is. And there's a system that stores a lot of that information, and then there's you that actually, initiates that interaction with the employer. But there's very little middle ground in between and very little automation there, right? So like, for example, approval by your boss, sending that data onto the system of record to your HRIS, or whatever, like things like that. And we do a lot of that automation using both the presentation layer so that you can actually see the context of the data that you're interacting with, as well as the routing and automation in the cloud using no-code RPA. Another example is all of the interactions between the business and the customers. All of that, has on one hand like a CRM, like a Salesforce or something along those lines, and then on the other side there is a recipient that needs to interact with the business, right? So, for example, purchase orders, or they have to do some legal work, or they have to do quote to cash, quoting systems for salespeople, and on and on and on. And we automate that interaction between the business and the recipient in a way that keeps that data between the business and the recipient and the customer, rather, flowing smoothly between the two, and also in the cloud and onto the systems of record that can be used for analytics and other things like that.
So in my previous role, and I'm curious to understand more where you think this is headed. In my previous role, I worked as a VP of sales of an organization that had 100 sales reps, and exactly what you said, like there's a lot of paperwork flowing in between and out of systems. And then eventually we decided, hey, we need to automate some things, and we hired like consultants to come in. We were using Salesforce at the time, and of course they updated our setup. They configured some different applications. Soon we were plugging in Zuora to do billing. We were doing all the different types of tools and integrations. So we see in the tech cycle, there's always like, hey, specialists, they build special tools to do special things. And then the big players try to integrate those special tools as features. And it like tries to the ecosystem goes from a lot of different players to like a few players, and then new specialists break out. Where do you see yourself in between? Because like you're in this place where, in my opinion, all like the enterprise players are always trying to, I think, build what you guys have, like do, or they want to do what you do, right? But they're not as good at it. Give us an idea of how you see your ecosystem, because we know that every system is trying to integrate more features, more capabilities. They want to make it seamless. They always talk about making seamless integrations with information. But we know that at the same time, businesses are always trying to go after best of breed, trying to do things differently. Give us your perspective on that ecosystem and where you see airSlate fitting in.
You're exactly right. I think a lot of the enterprise players want to do what we do, and they don't, exactly for the reason that I think that you've also mentioned, which is that they're trying to build using an outdated model of, in my opinion, an outdated model of building the products. We follow a product-led growth approach in airSlate, where some of the tenets of product-led growth is meeting your customer at the point of problem, right? And I think that a lot of people are trying to create demand inside of their customers and trying to tell them that, this is the way that you're supposed to be doing this. And that creates specialized software where the software dictates the actual process. And so we do something that's completely the opposite of that, where if you have a problem, we provide you the tools that are flexible and powerful enough in order to not to change the process and to do it the way that you want to do it. Without having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on, consultants and API development and whatever, and make this accessible to the buyer rather than to the implementer, right? So, and I think that also differentiates us in the sense that, the buyer is the user, rather, not the buyer. The user is the person who actually is responsible for a lot of that process automation, right? So it's in the case of sales, sales ops. These are the people that are director level sales ops, for example, right? And so right now what they have to do is they have to go through this whole process. They have to call somebody, they have to get consultants, they have to get integrators, they have to pay a lot of money in order to actually make this work. And then it doesn't work in the way that they want it to work. It works in the way that the system allows it to work. And so we change that completely in the sense that we give the person who is actually responsible for the result the power to implement that result as well, without the need of consultants. And we're very unique in the space in that sense. That allows us to reach a much wider audience rather than focusing on the Fortune 500 and the people who have like $1 million budgets in order to implement these things. we reach to everybody, and a lot of our customers are government institutions, and they're small clinics, and they are nonprofits. We do a lot of work in education as well, and we also have $1 million ARR customers who are Fortune 500 customers, big insurance companies, and things like that, because we bring down the cost of implementation without actually sacrificing the flexibility of and the power of the product.
Yeah, and in the past couple of years, there's been this rise of, I call them middleware tools, but like that's just my terminology for it, where it's like, hey, this software is actually designed to move information from A to B versus like, hey, I'm going to build a feature kit of everything. I'm curious, how did you make the decision to go down this path? Because you had PDF Filler, it was built, you were building that business, you mentioned it got to a $16 million run rate. Were you already moving in that direction while PDF Filler were like, hey, we're going to go start building the toolkits that allow businesses to move information from whatever tools they want, whether it's in ours or others? When did you guys make that strategic decision to say, like, we're going to be like the pipeline, we're going to be the building kit, the toolkit that's going to allow this to happen, versus like, hey, I'm going to build the all-in-one solution, which is, of course, something people do decide.
There's a couple of things that spurred this on. When we were building PDF Filler, and we're still continuing to build PDF Filler is the largest and most powerful PDF editing solution in the cloud. It has close to 1 million paying customers. That's been a very successful product for us. But when our customers came to us and they started to use PDF Filler, which was really a digitization tool, they started asking for more workflow. And the first part of the workflow that they started asking for is e-signature. And e-signature really is a workflow solution in the sense that what e-signature does and the value that it provides is not the ability to sign the documents, but really the ability to send the documents for signature. That's the part that a lot of people don't understand about the e-signature space, is that it's actually a workflow automation, document workflow automation space. And when we bought Sign Now in order to complement PDF Filler and bring that capabilities into PDF Filler, and we started talking to Sign Now customers, what we understood was that the biggest problem that people faced was actually not the simple workflows, not the ability to send out the document for signature and then bring it back, but really the configuration and automation of much more complicated document workflows. So I'll give you examples, I want to send out this quote only after an opportunity in my CRM changes status from lead to qualified lead or something like that, right? And so the ability to do that really involved tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of integrations, API development, and other things like that.
Wow.
That was really, really expensive. And so what we decided was that we would essentially bring down that cost of configuration and deployment from hundreds of thousands of dollars to single-digit thousands of dollars using no-code RPA solution. And that's how we came upon this idea that it's not enough to digitize and maybe create very simple workflows, but really in order to create a unified solution, you have to be able to create something that's flexible and powerful enough on one hand and accessible to the end customers, non-technical end users on the other.
I got to ask, when you were approached, hey, I want you to join PDF Filler, so you were doing something different. As the world of enterprise document management and workflows started expanding, what was your reaction to like how complicated it actually was? Because it's one of those things where I think it's simple to say like, oh, I just need this contract. Hey, Borya, I just need a tool that makes, as soon as this status changes, I want to be able to send a quote. It sounds so simple. And yet, like you just said, you're talking about tons of API calls, tons of configs, tons of customizations. Did you understand at that time how, I guess, challenging the problem would be to solve?
No, and I think that was the reason for our success, is that we didn't know how hard it was going to be, so like, and that if we did, we'd never actually go down this road. And I think that's a story of a lot of entrepreneurs, is that they are ignorant of all of the detailed, problems that are waiting for them, and so they think that it's simpler than it really is. But I think a lot of it has to do, so for us, we were lucky in that we started with something very simple, and then we let our customers guide us towards the next step and the next step and the step after that, right? And so that allowed us to continuously build upon an existing customer base and really solve real problems for real people, rather than create abstract, very complicated sort of constructions about value creation. And so I think that allowed us to continuously build that product arc. The other part that I think really helped us out as well is that we were really focused on making it very, very simple for everyday people, and we never really had an idea of something that we would end up as being. We were just continuously innovating on the things that we already had and making it better for the customers that already used our products.
All right, so that's where I wanted to get into next, which is the rise of low code. Low code has been a promise for, I think, a long time. It seems to be growing even more prominently today. But one of the things that's always been challenging is developing an interface that, like you said, a non-technical person can understand. Like everyone recognizes, I think, that that's the key. If you can unlock that, you have a better chance. How have you and how has your team approached in building? Usually it's at the interface level, which is like, hey, how do I build something that a non-technical person can understand? It's very hard to define. I like to think of it back in the days of cameras. If you remember, like cameras in the early 2000s, they had like what seemed like 100 buttons and 45 menus, and people need all this stuff. And then over time, people figured out that actually, if you build all the focus tools into software and just give them one button, that's actually what they want. They actually don't want these options, which is challenging because in the world of enterprise config, I need options because you don't know what I'm configuring A to B, right? And so that's you in particular, I feel like airSlate particularly is got to be pretty good at this, because if you're solving for this is great, because every company wants to handle their documents, I feel like, their own way, which means absolutely. You got to build a tool that gets them the ability to handle things their own way. How do you guys approach solving that problem?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there, and I mean, I think that's really the right question to ask. And so there's two things that work in our favor. One is we really follow a Kaizen approach. A lot of people think that they're going to think of something, build it, and then that's going to work. And I think the analogy with cameras is exactly the right analogy, in the sense that you start with something that's simple, and then you try it out, and then you decrease the complexity of it with follow-on products, right? And so Kaizen is a Japanese word for constant change. And we constantly change our products internally, and actually our product teams have engagement and usage OKRs, which they need to meet on a quarterly basis, that simplify product usage and increase engagement with customers. And so over time, that broadly improves our funnel, right? So product-led growth funnel, in the sense that more people actually go through the product. And every time we think about these new changes, the way we think about them is we think about linearity of the product. We think about making the product less complex from a branching perspective, in the sense that you have only one option to do at a given time, and that really helps people go through these processes and make the interface a lot more clear, because you only have one option. If you only have one button and that one button does everything for you, well, then you have an iPad, and that was brilliant, right? And I mean, I think that was one of the insights, and we sort of follow that model as we continuously improve the product. And I think the other part is that initially, when you think about the architecture of the product, you have to think about how to make this architecture very, very flexible. And we used an analog of a programming model called MVC, Model View Controller, which separates the logic from the presentation, from the data storage. And that is a model which became very popular in 2000s. And was really the beginning of Web 2.0, where web was not only the delivery of information, but really the logic and the application layer on top of that information. And I think that when people understood that they had to build in that logic layer, it had to be separate in order for it to work. So Facebook, for example, looks the same for you and for me, but the information that it delivers is very different. And that logic layer that says, this post, gets shown to Albert and this post gets shown to Borya, that logic layer is very separate from like what you actually see, inside of Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. And we use a very similar kind of a construct in order to create a tool that is, on one hand, infinitely flexible, on the other hand, very modular, so that things look the same on one hand, but you can combine them in different ways in order to make a myriad or like a combinatorially large number of possible solutions.
When you think about your, I keep thinking back to your OKRs and what you just said, right? You said like infinite combinations, because that's what your customers, you just cannot predict what your customers are going to want, information, how they're going to want it to move. How do you evaluate like your team, meaning like, hey, we're doing a good job because these people are able to make their decisions quickly? Is it like time on screen? Is it time in between steps? Is it completed integrations? Like, how do you measure success there? Because truly each of your users is, like you said, they're using the same tool, but they're all going down different paths.
Yeah. So we actually have a very data-driven product development strategy. And one of the ways that we approach that is we break up the product into individual funnels. So every screen is in one way or another a funnel, and a product team is responsible for, managing that funnel. And the funnel is defined by the number of people that actually go into that screen and the number of people that end up successfully leaving that screen, doing something on it. Each product team is responsible for improving the conversion rate from the people that actually were interested in trying to do something and the number of people that actually successfully completed whatever that screen allowed you to do.
No, that makes total sense. Yeah, I didn't, because I was thinking about like, because each number might be potentially different, right? Like time, like how long it takes someone to do something, because like they might be trying to figure out something infinitely more complicated. So I didn't know how you were doing, but you're just saying like, hey, do they successfully get the job done?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yes.
When you think about like where you're going, we noticed, for example, that you have like all like bot selection, which makes it even easier. If I don't even, it sounds like I don't, I'm taking a look at some of the options like, save to Google Drive, export to Google Sheets. These are similar things like what Zapier offers, which is like, hey, I've pre-configured this. So you're like selecting from a menu, like, oh, I want to do these kinds of things. What do you see for the future of making this even easier? Because that's the race, right? It's always going to be infinite capability. That's even easier than before. How do you envision handle your company? Like, what innovations down the pipe do you think you're going to want to integrate that are going to make this even easier for users to manage their workflows?
I think the thing that we do that really nobody else in the industry does is give the ability to people to create very complicated computations and very complicated logic, but package that into something that's repeatably runnable, right? And I think that, again, if you look at computer development, software development, you see a lot of that with creation of libraries, right? So like what allows software to be created exponentially, it's the fact that nobody does web development in assembly anymore, right? I mean, like, nobody, because between you and assembly, there's like a bunch of different subroutines and libraries that people have written before you, and open source allows you to utilize all of that work in order to create something that's, repeatable and reusable on one hand, and on the other hand, you didn't actually spend time in coding it. And what we're doing is we're giving our customers the ability to create, flows, bots, and a bunch of things like that are reusable and that can be shared. So for example, like, we have a bunch of people that are building AI bots, right? So, and those AI bots look at the data that goes through that particular document workflow automation workflow, and try to predict certain values and try to understand, what the recipient behavior is, and make some decisions about what to do and things like that. And each one of these bots is responsible for its own little thing, but can be reused in combination with other AI bots in other document workflows that you create in the future. And so this compartmentalization of the logic layer really allows you to create something that is very, very flexible and very complex, but very, very quickly without having to actually code it every time.
I mean, that makes total sense. I'm imagining a future where it's like you get a Rolodex of steps. Like, hey, do you want to do this? It's like, oh yeah,
Right.
just add
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Just like
yeah.
builders to just be like adding these things up together. That'd be phenomenal.
Yeah.
When it comes to your leadership style, I'm curious about that because one of the things that we always ask CEOs is like, how do you manage and navigate the modern, building a tech company? Because right now you're in every tech company is experiencing the same thing right now, which is increased customer demand, right? Customers want more and more. There's going to be more choice for employees because we all hear about companies, people leaving. So compensation can't just be the only thing. We can't. Doesn't exist where you can just be like, hey, I need you to do this. I want to pay you this much money. You're going to get it done. How would you describe your leadership style? And also, I'd love to understand, like, does your background in academics influence your leadership style?
I am very much an academic in the way that I lead my team, in the sense that in academia, you're supposed to be an expert, and the respect of the people that work with you come out of the fact that you provide value to them, right? And that value comes from expertise. And so, I really try to understand deeply everything that my product teams and my marketing teams in a lot of ways and business teams do. Not just on a high level, but really understand the details of that, because I think that if I don't understand the details of it, then I have no place in that discussion and making a decision based on something that I don't understand deeply myself. So that's certainly one thing that I think separates me from a lot of people that I've spoken with. And really that's part of my leadership style. The other one is I really value data over expertise. And so that creates a very meritocratic culture. I think meritocratic culture in the sense that, you can create a hypothesis or have any opinion that you want, and it doesn't matter whether you're a junior developer or whether you're a COO or whatever it is, but unless you can argument why we should be spending resources in trying that hypothesis, what the goals are from actually testing that, and how you're going to test it, we're not actually going to be doing this. And so that creates this culture of like, we do things in very different ways than other people do it. And sometimes it takes longer for us to get to the right answer because we get to it ourselves rather than, take it for granted that it was the right answer. But on the other hand, that allows us to be able to scale it much more because we know why the right answer is the right answer. And so we can double down on it. And so we can continuously sort of expand on the success that we've achieved ourselves. And I think that also is very different from what a lot of other tech leaders do. And I think from a recruiting perspective, we do things that are very different on one hand, and on the other hand, and so we attract people who are entrepreneurial themselves, who are not afraid of challenges, and who really are responsible for what it is that they do, and who have a lot of autonomy in being able to actually accomplish things in their own way. And I think that makes it very different from a lot of the other tech companies, which is much more top down in the sense that here's the right answer. This is what we're going to. Doesn't matter whether you agree with this or not. And, this is what we're going to do. Go out and do it, So we have a very flat, autonomous, team-based structure where each team is really responsible for their part of the business. And I don't get involved unless I really understand, what it is that I'm talking about.
Well, listen, I know all of us have worked at a place where we answered to someone who we felt like didn't know much about our roles. So the fact that the first part where you said, hey, I want to know a little bit about every role before I can make a judgment or add to the conversation. The second part you were talking about was being extremely data driven. I think a lot of tech leaders are data driven, but I'm curious about for you specifically, because this is what I think. Ultimately, I think what separates the great from the good is judgment, right? Which is like, hey, the data says this, right? So sometimes it's significantly different. So for example, like you say, hey, let's go option A and let's go option B. What if option A and option B have similar results? How do you make judgments when there's not definitive data that says this is absolutely the right answer? How do you approach your judgment tree?
I think a lot of tech leaders think they perceive themselves as being data driven, but I think that the way that we do things is very different in the sense that it's really very similar to the way that we did science, in the sense that you're really hypothesis driven first, and then you create something that's very simple out of that hypothesis as an experiment. You look at the data that comes out of that experiment, and just like in science, the null hypothesis is that things are not going to work out, right? And you have to prove the opposite of that when you're doing an experiment. And we really never make a decision on whether to do something or not do something. We really make a decision on whether to scale it or not, because when we do these experiments, we don't do them at scale. We do them on a very small number of users or customers or whatever, and that really limits the amount of investment that we create before we actually have to make a decision. And the decision to scale it or not to scale it then comes from what is the return on investment on scaling that, right? So for example, like you asked, how do you make the decision if there's no difference? If there's no difference and it doesn't cost us anything and we think that strategically that's something that we want to move forward with, then we'll do it. If there's no difference and it costs us a lot in order to scale something, then we're not going to do it, because the uncertainty in the return outweighs the investment that we would have to do in order to scale something.
When you're building the future, there's not always data to support what you're about to build. You know what I mean? So there's just not. And that's why most innovations come from outside. You mentioned earlier in the conversation, most innovations actually come outside of the realm of expertise, because it takes someone who has no clue to sometimes make that call. And so I think that's really smart to say hey, I still have a criteria, even if I don't have a result that I want. Like I thought experiment A, experiment B was significantly going to tell me the difference between the two. I still think having there has to be a way, a method to make that judgment. So I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I think that's what makes it fun, is that continuous improvement on things. And that's the other thing that I think that is very important, is that Kaizen only works when you do these things using very small steps. Right. And I think that that's what makes us different as well, is because when you have a vision, a lot of people and a lot of entrepreneurs think that they have to build their full vision. And then, and a lot of entrepreneurs that come to me and they ask me for investment or something, or advice even, they're like, well, I'm going to build out this big thing. And then I'm like, well, okay, so what are you going to do with it afterwards? And I'm like, well, it's a big thing that's going to be that's going to be worth millions or billions of dollars, and it's just because it's going to be so much better. And I think that what people lose sight of is your first product is never going to be good enough, right? So, and what people should focus on is, I think this is now banal, right? Like I think a lot of people have been written about, a lot of things have been written about it, from agile to whatever, is that you want to get to an MVP, and that's when, as fast as possible, and that's when the real work starts, right? So the real work starts when you actually start improving on that MVP, and the smaller and the simpler that MVP is, the easier it's going to be for you to continuously improve on it, and the faster you're going to get to that exponential improvement part of the cycle. And I think that's really, really important for people to understand, is that you really want to focus on the latter part of that, right? So the improvement part of that, not the building of the first, idea part of it, because the first idea is going to be wrong.
Well, you're in the right field with that mentality, man. Software, I joke with people all the time. So the problem with software is it's never done. It's never good enough. Just kind of like how you said your parents on your grades, right? It's true. Whatever you have today is not good enough. There's someone else building something better. And the only industry I can think of where you can make something that's good enough maybe is food. There's certain food products, they haven't changed their recipe for decades. But outside of that, most technology, software especially, you're never going to be done. So for anyone out there listening that says, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to build something, I think you got to take Borya's advice, which is whatever you think you're going to build, know that when you get there, it's not good enough. Like
That's right.
what's crazy.
And so logically, it's the process of improvement which is more important than the actual idea of what you're going to build. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that. So think about the great companies in the world, the great technology companies, Microsoft, for example. Microsoft in the 1970s, right, with DOS, has nothing to do with Microsoft in 2022, right? It's a completely different company. It has completely different products. So it's not really the idea that made them successful. It must be something else that made them successful. And I posit that what made them successful is the process of improvement of that idea. And that's what makes companies great. It's when they lose that ability to consistently improve on the products that they created, that's when they start dying. And I think you said it right, is that everything is changing and the speed of that change is increasing with time.
Now I gotta ask, what do your parents think of you now? Because I'm sure they love you very much. It's like the push from being the child of immigrants is always there. Do they think like, wow, Borya did it?
They do, but they're very confused about how. It doesn't make sense in their worldview. They're like, we're not exact. This like breaks our whole like idea of how the world works, because that should never have happened. And so they're happy for me, but they're also a little bit, annoyed at the fact that I broke their whole worldview.
Well, listen, I'm sure they're proud. You know what I mean? Like, that's pretty awesome. Like you got there. I'm in the same boat. Like my parents don't really understand what I do, but they just think it's cool.
Yeah. And that's really the only thing that you can hope for, right? I mean, you want your parents to be happy, even if they're confused.
Borya, I appreciate you coming on our show today. Thanks for joining us on IT Visionaries. Thanks for sharing how you built airSlate. I think the way you approach it is, like you said, it's a recipe for success, which is this constant idea of iteration, continuous improvement, bringing that Kaizen model to your company. I mean, I think, no success is ever guaranteed, but like if you're willing to change, you always have a better shot of getting there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Albert. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for watching. Subscribe to this channel for more great IT thought leadership. And thanks to our partners at Salesforce Platform for making this show possible. Go to salesforce.com/newsletter to discover timely insights and useful tips tailored to your role.